Hi, I'm Lori Henriksen, Vice President of 911 Education at GovWorx, and I'd like to welcome you to Beyond the Front Lines, strengthening the coaches who build your future leaders. Today's webinar is sponsored by GovWorx, makers of CommsCoach, a complete 911 workforce support platform used by over 325 ECCs nationwide that connects hiring, training, evaluations, and real-time support to help telecommunicators perform at their best when it matters most. We have an awesome panel of experts with us, beginning with Rhonda Broadus, 911 Communications Director at Marshall County Communications Commission in Iowa, Matthew Harwell, Emergency Communications Operations Manager at Lincoln County Communications in Nebraska, Andy Burton, Director of Operations at Snohomish County 911, and also GovWorx's Chief of Public Safety Engagement, Tipi Brookins. This time, I'm so proud to turn the mic over to Tipi.
Thank you so much, Lori, for that. So we are super excited today because today we will focus on the 911 plus one framework, which focuses on strengthening the coaching layer, supervisors, CTOs, and trainers to ensure a PSAP or ECC thrives rather than just survives. And our objectives for today, we're going to be able to identify the coaching layer, the gap, recognize how an undertrained plus one layer, supervisors and CTOs, causes inconsistent standards and late feedback. We're going to apply the 5 pillars of coach capability, utilize a behavior-based model covering operational leadership, wellness aware leadership, coaching discipline, training craftsmanship, and fairness. Also, how we can speak about simulation based training. Structure short 5 to 10 minute supervisor simulations to train performance under stress and conflict navigation. And so we're going to just jump right into the questions. And if is anything that you'd like to ask or any comments, please feel free to use the QA piece of the webinar. The case for the plus one. Let's focus on why coaching the coach is the highest leverage work in a PSAP or ECC. Most centers think they have a training problem, but they actually have a coaching layer problem. The system that determines if call takers and dispatchers stabilize under stress lives at the supervisor and the CTO level. When this plus one layer is strong, the whole center gains morale and retention. When it's weak, everything leaks, from inconsistent standards to burned out trainers. Andy, in your experience, how does a supervisor's coaching style determine whether feedback feels like support or punishment for a call taker or dispatcher?
Yeah, having lived through both variations of how the feedback is delivered, I can honestly say that for a long time, I think there was a belief that the dispatchers and call takers didn't want feedback. But in our journey here to reach out to staff and work on culture, we've learned that's not the case. They want the feedback, they crave the feedback, whether it's positive or constructive. The biggest sort of rub is the way it's delivered. So there's a it does go sideways, like you said, Tippy, a little bit when it's fear-based or it's very robotic or it's very process driven. You're calling somebody back, you've already got the write-up, you've already listened to the call, and you're just going to tell them what they did wrong, tell them not to do it again, and here, read the policy and sign here. That doesn't change the behavior. It's not well received, and it just sets the whole agency up for culture issues and it's just not effective. So we've heard things that we never thought we would hear from staff. They not only do they want to be told if they've handled something and there's some constructive feedback, they're willing to say, tell everybody else about my mistake. And that was really shocking to hear. Because I'm like, wow, we really won't, we don't put people on blast around here, but they said, if you do it in a professional way, if you deliver the feedback to me as a person, and ask me what happened and get me involved in the conversation, it's just I'll accept it more. And I absolutely, if want to learn, I want everybody to learn from my mistake because I take this job seriously, and and I don't want someone else to make the same mistake as I did. So it's been very eye-opening, and just basically reinforces the question. The coaching style drives everything.
That's amazing. And like you said, the way of delivery, right? How you choose to deliver that message, and then also the transparency piece. And Matt, what would be your take on this?
Yeah, and I think absolutely Andy kind of hits the nail on the head in so many ways. And one of the unique things that I think we forget is when we start to really focus on performance, and what that looks like, we start to really address, in my opinion, what the heart of coaching is about. And it's the human, right? It's the person on the other side of that conversation. And when we look at performance as kind of that metric, I think we start to really shift that. And I know as we were even kind of working through the developing of this, one of the things that quickly came to mind for me is so often we forget that that style of coaching, if we're not training that plus one layer in our roles, really comes from what do they know? What is their experience? And so for so many people in that supervisory role, or even as a communications training officer, a lot of their experience is from being a really, really great dispatcher. They have been kind of the one that rose to the top based on that prior performance. And so we treat a lot of those coaching conversations very similar to what we would with any other situation that we're dealing with. And we treat it as an emergency, and very much we equate it to potentially a call for service. And I know one of the biggest things that for me kind of helps change that, and make it feel more supportive than punishment, is to really slow down at times and recognize what are the needs of that person, who is that person, focusing on what their strengths are and kind of moving us forward, so that we're not just, to Andy's point, right, bringing them in. We've already written the documentation, and then we're just giving that to them and basically saying, this is how you messed up, be better. But rather, we're getting back to the heart of that coaching conversation, which is the person. And so I know one of the biggest things that I believe we can really change that rhetoric and help those supervisors, that plus one layer as a whole, start to really focus on support over punishment, is to not treat every situation or every coaching opportunity like an emergency.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that. And so, as you mentioned, the heart of coaching, and so going from supervisor to now, from a great dispatcher to a supervisor, and ensuring that we understand that there's going to be a change in style and the delivery. And so, how I can add to this is that, what we have to remember, and so the coaching layer, it's the highest leverage in PSAPs, ECCs, and just anything that we do, right, in any of our organizations, because remember, they are going to be the ones that are going to touch the most important people of an organization. They are going to affect them in so many ways. And so if we do not, make sure that we are coaching our coaches, they're going to affect that retention and that piece that, we always talk about, which is going to be staffing. And so when we speak about what does good look like for supervisors in training, we aren't just looking for high performers. We are looking for operational leadership under load. People who can create a calm tempo without minimizing urgency. A great coach uses evidence. Now, not how they feel moments, and knows how to give feedback that is fast, specific, and balanced with one change target. Andy, how do you move people forward based on performance rather than just time served in a training program, and understanding where strengths and weaknesses are? Like, what does that mean for you?
Wow, that's really a difficult situation. I think it's very easy to, rely back on our training program and say, hey, they got this many hours and you have these metrics and they can be arbitrary at times. So I definitely buy into the fact that, we should be looking at someone's overall performance. Um, we're using some more tools to try to evaluate folks, based on scenarios and simulations and those sorts of things because you obviously can't sit in the training position or and learn everything. So we really believe in trying to use some tools at our disposal, but you need to also just look at holistic performance, I think, and really it kind of goes back to what Matt was saying about, folks that get into leadership positions or that plus one layer are usually, operationally and technically experts. And so then their expectations are very high. And I think if you spend a lot of time with them, educating them that, the standard is the standard for the agency, not for the individual trainer. Um, Definitely guilty of that in my career. I expected so much out of someone, but that's not what the agency expects, and that's okay. You can coach and tell people how to go the extra mile, but you need to be looking at someone, through an objective lens of what the agency standard is. So I hope that answered the question.
That's amazing. It just shows the accountability that you're willing to take for your agency, and that speaks distances to your leadership, Andy. And Matt, as this question is raised, as far as benchmarks, what's your take?
Yeah, and I think that's unique, right? And again, for me, and what I oftentimes truly help or hope to recognize and bring to the surface is when it comes to the heart of moving people forward in any capacity, um, even with standards, with those protocols, whatever the different aspects may be, we have to recognize that they're still unique people, and we can't kind of really minimize what they're learning, how they learn, how they're going to kind of digest it, and then be able to really live it out just based on simple metrics of time. And I think one of the unique aspects so often is we want to put people in a very cookie cutter model, or we want to put them in a box to where they're really contained. And for me, one of the unique aspects, and I like to share this often, is I think anytime we start to put people in boxes, we limit things like creativity and the ability to really move things forward. So we have to recognize the individual that is on the other side of that coaching conversation. And when we really start to look on, moving people forward based on performance, rather than just maybe that time in some sort of training program, we start to recognize who the individual is. We find their strengths, and as we've talked about, also those growth opportunities, and we bring those to the forefront. But I think we also forget coaching is not just about disciplining or telling something. And I think this is one of the unique reasons I love the word coach is to truly say that we're a coach, you have to have someone who is wanting to be coached, if that makes sense. You have to have someone on the other side of that. And so we talk about that. It's kind of that joint relationship. Again, you know the person so well, that you understand where they are, where they want to go, and what that looks like. And for me and my experience, one of the things I absolutely love, and we oftentimes even hear in Lincoln, is we recognize that it's not just about saying where we want someone to go, but it's about them helping shape and understand what that looks like. And so I think, simply put, to understand how do you move people forward based on performance, they have to know where they're going, and they have to have really put in the time to develop those goals. And I know as we were even preparing for this and talking as a group prior, that was one of the things that for me, I think is drastically important, is you can't just say because someone spent XYZ amount of time in a place, they understand where they're going and what they need to get there. Rather, we want it to be about them and the goals, and really helping them understand what are those intrinsic and extrinsic kind of motivators to get them to that point.
That's amazing. Just really stepping outside of the norm of what we normally do, ensuring that, we're not limiting, them in their abilities, and then just really, really identifying the strengths and knowing that they know where they are going. Because like you said, if a person steps into a role and they're not willing to be coached, then we're at a dead end pretty much, right? And so, as it relates to, again, to the in person, to your employee, to the trainee, that good for a supervisor or trainer, that's going to be the success. That's going to be them coming to work and showing up every day. That's going to be the smiles. That's going to be their enthusiasm to, complete the next task and take it from there. So that was amazing. And as we go on to, I'm sorry, Lori, go right ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple questions for you guys that came up in the chat. The first one is, what about if a trainee is performing very well, but has not been exposed to a broad range of incidents or events? They go on to say, I've released trainees who perform well under ordinary circumstances. Then when they're faced with something that they've never encountered in training and did not do so well, the question then was, why was this person cut loose?
I'll jump in on that. And I think again that goes back to and I think it's something Andy said earlier, and we're probably all guilty of, is oftentimes those who get promoted and move into these different leadership roles, whether it's in an ECC, the PSAP type space, they are very much those high performers. And that's one of the things that I think really came to light in our prior conversation preparing for this. And when that high performer gets in that place, that also comes with really, really high expectations and high standards. And I don't think in any way, shape, or form we ever want to minimize that. But I think one of the biggest challenges we run into is we forget where we were ourselves when we were at that point. And so I think keeping things really realistic, again, and I think this is a great question that came in, is you can be exposed to only so many things. But I think we sometimes forget that in our role in the PSAP or the ECC, we really are at the mercy, for lack of a better term, of as those emergencies come in. And so it's providing that space, but it's also really keeping at the forefront that as that plus one layer, our goal is to remind the others around them to kind of challenge some of those that toxic tendency is what I would call it, of the why did this person get cut loose, is to remind them where they were themselves when they're at that point. And I think it's to really draw the attention back to, instead of so quickly jumping to the question of why was that person cut loose, we want to pique the interest of that individual's creative curiosity of how might I help them perform better next time, or how might I support them in this role. I think it's simply put, no one knows everything until they've experienced a lot of those things, and there's no way to experience everything in any training scenario. So I believe for me personally, it's setting the standard is not that they are yet an expert, it's that they've met our standards and they're going to continue to grow and develop. Let's find ways to continue to support them in that space.
Yeah, I echo everything Matt said. I think I would just go on to add that I think it takes time and it's not easy, but something to help with that is if you're establishing a culture of coaching for everybody, an environment of learning, like that we're career-long learners. If that becomes a little bit more of the norm in your agency, I think people will just understand, that, wow, that didn't really go well, but like you said, have the grace to say they're a little bit newer, but I know they're going to get coached and I know they'll do better next time. So that's pretty, it's a big thing. It's a big thing, but if you start taking little bites of that elephant, I think that will help. And also just like Matt said, encouraging folks to go away from the default negativity and reach out and say, hey, how can I help you? And then additionally, what I like to say to the trainees is we do everything we can to give you a strong foundation and have strong policy that will apply somehow, some way to almost every call you get. But there's always going to be things, like you said, we're at the mercy. We don't know what's coming in. But the goal is to give you a strong enough foundation that you can make a sound decision, and you need to do that. You need to act, and we can talk about it later. But And if you can explain to me what your rationale was, I appreciate that. And then we can talk about next time, think about this, that, or the other. Um, I think doing that work, which again isn't easy, but I think doing that work really helps with that.
We also had one other question, and I think that you guys have really touched upon this, but to address it specifically, it says some employees fear performance will be tracked and used to coach and counsel them, but any suggestions on shifting the perception and focus while maintaining our standards and protocols?
I'll jump in again. First and foremost, I love alliteration. So I love that we're talking about coaching and we've got a good C word in counsel as well. And I think, again, for me, that it would be the third C word, is the tendency that we are defaulting to being critical versus being curious. And again, I'm going to say that over and over again. And I think to really shift the perception, that's where we start. And I think Andy really said this well just a moment ago when we talk about coaching isn't just something on a list that we're checking the box, but rather it is it's a culture that's developed in the ECC, it's in the PSAP. And so again, when we come back to if all of our coaching is equated to critically conversing with someone and checking some boxes, that's going to be the kind of the foundation. We are only going to create that kind of space where people fear what might come. And so again, I think the suggestions for me are probably threefold. I think first and foremost, it starts at every level of leadership being willing to accept that we're going to be curious and we're going to ask really great questions before we jump to conclusions. I would say, secondly, a suggestion on kind of shifting that perception. And I think the word Andy used just a moment ago was really about grace. And I think one thing that I love in the team that I get to lead with and even the people that I work with in other leadership capacities for the Lincoln Police Department, we really talk about intent. And when we go into any of those conversations with the best intent, right, regardless of what the performance was, no one intends to be a really crummy employee or do poorly. Sometimes that happens. And yes, accountability is really important, but we assume the best intent. So when we talk about, like Andy's point of, if you've given them those tools and we give them the ability, and I know we'll talk about this here in a second with kind of those gray areas at times, I think the unique part is we're going to assume best intent. And then I would say the third aspect of it, in my opinion, is to hold ourselves to the same standard and coach ourselves in the same way. And I think that's one of the unique challenges when it comes to this +1 layer is we recognize, especially as we develop as leaders, that sometimes the most difficult person to coach is ourselves. And I think that becomes a piece of it, right? So the biggest suggestion, in my opinion, is to shift my perceptions and my focus on how I even coach and lead myself at times. And super guilty to just be transparent of not doing a good job of that. I tend to default to those negative spaces. And so I think challenging ourselves individually allows us to start furthering some of that positive shift in our organization.
Matt, that's amazing. And so I'll just say the mechanism, right? The mechanism that we choose in order to go in that direction and ensuring that the messaging, relates positively to coaching, because coaching is just not a one-time thing. Now, when you think about counseling, you think about behavior, right? That's that equal to behavior. But when you think about coaching, it's all the time. It should be a positive on it. It should be something that we speak about often and not just during those moments when there has been an issue that has been raised. And so when we go into the next piece, moving from gotcha quality assurance to developmental evaluations, consistency is culture. We need to avoid the trainer lottery by calibrating how we evaluate calls. Calibration isn't a QA task, it's a leadership activity. It involves monthly reviews of lagging indicators like retention and quarterly reconciliation of same call scoring. Matt, how do you handle the defensiveness spiral when a trainee feels they are being targeted during an evaluation?
Yeah, and the way you lay that out, right, is very clear. And I think human nature is, again, we talked about the high standards that oftentimes that plus one layer have. I would tend to assume, in my personal experience, anyways, a lot of the people who gravitate, who have that strong sense of purpose, who have that strong sense of wanting to help people, a lot of people fall into our PSAPs and our ECCs because their why is they want to positively impact someone's life. So whether they had a negative experience or something else of that sort, so they set, again, that really high standard for themselves. So when we start to find those ways to where things like quality assurance and coaching aren't just focused on the places that maybe there was a misstep or where there was that negative situation or some performance issue, but rather we also balance that with finding the ways to really recognize what have they done well. I think we start to kind of chip away at the defensiveness spiral being the place that people default to. And again, I think it's something that's developed over time. It doesn't happen overnight. And in so many cases, I think we live in a world that defaults to defensiveness on the regular. And so our big role and part of coaching is really in a brilliant way, you learn that person so that you can help them take down some of those defensive walls that they build. Because those are really developed to help care for ourselves and protect ourselves. So as we start to help them understand, let's build the bridge with maybe those same bricks versus building a wall. I think we start to really change that perception and we help the trainee walk into those spaces to where they do want to get better. I go back to what even Andy said at the start today and recognizing that sometimes the things that people really crave is to understand and even maybe publicly have shared with the team what was the misstep and how can we learn from that. And I think when we find ways to really share the learning that comes from those collective type of spaces, we start to normalize that we are humans, we're not perfect, and instead of saying we're perfect, we're going to find ways to continue to grow throughout all of that. I think we then really start to have the ability to tap into some of those high performing, just natural tendencies versus some of the defensiveness spiral that can come from that otherwise.
Yes, making
Yeah,
sure that we normalize. And Andy, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut
that's
you off. Go
okay.
right
Yeah,
ahead. Go
sorry,
right
Tippy.
ahead.
I just wanted to piggyback on something else. I agree 100% with everything Matt said, but Tippy, you had said something about calibration and taking the time to look inward and constantly do these things. That's important because I find that the defensive spiral sometimes comes up it manifests itself in the way of saying, I'm not the only one who does this wrong. Everyone else does it wrong, right? And so I think if you shift and you're finding a way to look agency wide, like what is our baseline, and be willing to be vulnerable and say like we're not following this policy. So we either need to coach and get everybody to follow it, or we need to reevaluate whether the policy even is applicable anymore. But if you're not doing that, I think that gives a little bit more credence to that argument. And so I just wanted to highlight, like I heard that and the light bulb went on that um, it's okay. It's okay. We always want to make sure that we're putting the best foot forward, like externally, and that we're the best and shine the light on the positive. But I think it's okay to say, you know what, we're missing the mark here as a team. Let's all take accountability for it and move forward. And the only way you can do that is if you do what you said and do that calibration. Just make that part of your leadership is to be looking at the whole and instead of the individual. And just really quick too, the other thing is it goes along with what we've been talking about how we're all hardwired, and most of us dispatched before, and most of us were high performers. And I think what comes with that is that emergency piece that Matt talked about, and also just I call it the like I got to clear my screen, I got to clear my screen. So, trying to coach somebody or trying to, roll things out or teach, I think we just have a tendency to want to get it done, one and done, check the box. And what I find is you just can't talk about things enough. You can't just say it one time and everybody's going to get it and do it. Like anything, you just have to repeat yourself, and that's very counterintuitive, I think, for the way we're hardwired as public safety professionals. But you want to move on, and you don't want to sit there. You feel like you're beating a dead horse, but really it does take a lot of communication and a lot of time to really connect with people and get them to get on board.
Andy, thank you so much for that. And as you mentioned, being vulnerable and being able to say that, hey, yes, we maybe need to update a policy or procedure in order for this to go correctly. And in her absence, Rhonda brought us, she was not able to make it today, but in our preparation, she had some tech issues, but in our preparation, the one thing that she did mention, and I totally agree with this, as I mentioned, consistency is culture, but also front loading, right? Ensuring that when we are bringing on our folks in this piece, right, we want to make sure that we educate them on day one, maybe not in, literal day one, but when we speak about performance and expectations, ensuring that they understand what quality assurance, what that truly looks like. It's not our time to say that you've done wrong and this is going to happen, but just really, really front loading that information on for your folks and your trainees to ensure that they understand that once they've left that training classroom and that training environment, and now they're on the floor and now they are experiencing these quality assurance evaluations, them knowing that this is an opportunity to see where I can maybe improve or where I can possibly change how I'm doing something. Now, ensuring that they understand that they are following their policies and procedures, but maybe that's just those small tweaks. I know for myself, I'm a person who loves feedback. And so whenever those opportunities, presented themselves, that was amazing for me because it gave me a chance to even do better, to score that 100%. And so, like I said, we front loading is an actual thing. And so let's talk about one thing that I think it's actually missed in our space as far as simulations, using scenarios to build leadership reps. Most centers simulate call handling, but few simulate supervision. This is a gap with consequences. GovWorx recommends short 5 to 10 minute scenarios like handling a complaint from a call taker or giving specific direction based on a policy or procedure, followed by a structured debrief. AI can now help us scale this, drafting realistic role play scripts and debrief prompts from real calls. Matt, what is one policy gray zone scenario you've used to help a coach develop better judgment?
Yeah. And I think the unique part of this and what I love about this question, and as we were kind of conversing and talking through what this looks like is, and Andy started to bring this up earlier, is really the policy gray zone scenarios can be anything where you don't have a specific written directive that like very black and white fully describes that. And so I think for me, one of the best ways is to find kind of like we're talking about this plus one layer is finding the just to the left or just to the right of that policy, finding a scenario that is in that realm, but not exactly that way. And why I say that is especially early on, we're talking about developing these coaches or developing the coaches with skills to coach others, is that kind of inherently creates a space that's a little more comfortable to allow us to jump into some of those gray zones. Because I think when something is absolutely very, very foreign, we don't maybe set people up for success. And so again, when we're talking about those short 5 to 10 minute type things, we kind of look at that. And I think ultimately what that allows people to do is to see the parallels to the ideal scenario. But we know that nothing in life is always perfectly ideal. And so to be just a little bit removed. So for instance, I think one of them that I can think of at times is even in something when it comes to something like progressive discipline, as you start to recognize like what is is there a normal flow that works through it? And the situation and the reality is oftentimes it's not, because so much of it is situation dependent. And so finding ways to create situations that may not follow something really linear, but again, goes back to that creative challenge where someone has to use their curious nature to kind of work through, if these things were the different facets, where might this fall? Ultimately, and I know we talked about this prior, is I think something that starts to also equip people better is when, in some ways, it's not just driven solely by the decision being made always on maybe the policy, but also what are our values. And again, that goes back to what Andy said earlier, I think, is creating those situations where it's not just about the black and white of the words on a page, but really sometimes the spirit of who we are as public safety professionals, who we are as the first responder, who we are as humans, as we care for one another. How can we equip people? And I think Andy said it well, to where when they make that decision, as long as they're not violating the policy or the written directive, and they can articulate some of the why behind it, we continue to recognize that culture is that we're going to support them through that. So I think for me, that's some of it. It's just a little bit to the left or the right of the most ideal situation that the policy is written for.
Yeah, I agree again, 100%. I think the more I try to solve this, because we do struggle with our +1 layer wanting everything very black and white, and then they hear us say, we need you guys to be consistent, we need you to be calibrated. So, the easy button for that is to, just all do it the same, have it black and white. How do you want us to do it? So we're kind of sometimes feeling like we're speaking out of both sides of our mouth, but I was thinking that I think you can get at this if you kind of try to slow down, like Matt said, and at first start with the why. Like, why did this happen? Why are we thinking that this is something that needs to be dealt with? But maybe more importantly, what we don't do often enough, in my opinion, is start with asking, like, what are we trying to solve? What is the desired outcome, right? Because, as we look back at some of, in full transparency, some of the draconian stuff that we have here that has just lived on, it's like, wait a second, what are we trying to do? What's the behavior we're trying to change? And is it? Not really. So, the majority of the folks that aren't the issue are sort of having to live in this world that is restrictive and not making them feel really great about coming to work. So, again, I don't think we can underscore slowing down enough. And I know it's really hard for us, but if you do slow down and start asking those questions, because otherwise you just get caught up in, I just, again, need to get it taken care of and move on, because there's 12 other things that have to be dealt with here. So that's what I would add.
Awesome. And I'm just going to circle back to Matt and how you mentioned, the values driven decisions, because I think that's one piece that we sometimes we put off to the side, our mission and our values, right? What does that say? So if you're having that interaction with an employee, what are we led by, right? And that was really, really important that you brought that up, because again, that's not a policy. That's not a process or procedure. It's based on what is your understanding of the mission and what drives us. And then, as you mentioned, Andy, focusing on the change. What are we focusing on? How can we, change to ensure that we are focusing on that piece, right? And so, thank you both for that. And so, starting the operating rhythm, how can we get there? You don't need perfection to start. You need rhythm. Maybe start with one supervisor simulation per week, one documented coaching moment per shift. Finding the rhythm that would work for your team. Building this layer is the fastest path to better outcomes at the floor level. If you want stronger call handling, stronger radio discipline, better trainee success, and better retention, the highest leverage investment is often not another policy or another tool or even another mandate. It is building a coaching layer that can lead, teach, and reinforce excellence under pressure. Matt, please close us out our session with one thought on the importance of coaching the coach.
Yeah, and I know getting me to leave it to one thought is always tough and challenging. I think the biggest thing that ultimately why this is so important and why this is necessary is ultimately it comes down to, as I started today, right? It changes our focus from dealing with people as problems or situations and dealing with people as humans. And I think ultimately the thought on the importance of this is it allows us in so many situations to live out our leadership in ways that sometimes when we get caught up in the immediacy of things doesn't allow us to do. And so I think really the kind of capstone thing that it comes down to for me is where we started. When we create and treat coaching like a call for service, we do a big disservice to our team. And so I know we've echoed it a few times. Andy and I have both said it, and you have as well, Tipi, is sometimes we have to slow down. And I think that's one of the biggest things is to slow down and at times lean into some of the discomfort of the challenges and to really be curious again. And so I think that kind of hopefully answers that.
Andy, could you give us one thought or two or three?
Well, I think that my thought is that it's imperative. We have to give our folks, we're entrusting these folks to shape the generation, to set the culture. And we have to have respect enough for them to help them along the way. There's a few people out there I know that are born leaders and have all those qualities intrinsically, but the majority of us don't. And again, I'll say it again, growing up in this profession, it hasn't always led to, having the best examples. So I think that it's ultimately important. We also need to be able to be coached as well for those that are in above the +1 layer, to listen to folks and see what they need. So um, I don't think it can be an underscore or, it can't be understated, the importance of coaching the coach. So and folks want it and they're willing to learn, but we have to take the time. And again, I know we're sort of beating the slow down dead horse, but it's become a little bit of a mantra around my agency as well as like I know we are an emergency communication center, but I don't think everything's an emergency. In fact, probably not that many, but you have to put a filter on and take a breath.
They were amazing answers. Thank you both. And so what I'll just basically say on coaching the coach, we have been having this conversation about 911 and ECCs and public safety answering points, but in everything that we do, again, I'm just going to take it back. We have to coach the coach. I remember starting my career, almost 20 plus years ago. And I remember the first opportunity that I had in order to actually meet with an employee. And it was myself and another supervisor. And at that time, I was a very, very new supervisor and had not really, had a bunch of training. And so I was in the meeting and I was asked to lead the conversation. And so the issue was basically with an employee, and it was something very, very egregious. But however, I wasn't coached on how to deliver the correct feedback. And I just went right in and I said, you did this and you are this and you said that. And so I was honest. I said exactly what I observed, but there was a way to do it. There was a way to have that constructive feedback and how to deliver it. But again, at that time I was young and I didn't know, but I wasn't coached. And so I think when we speak about coaching the coach, I'll bring up what Matt said. We want to set our managers up and our supervisors up for success. We want to teach them, like Andy said, transparency is okay. Showing that we want to take the accountability is okay. And so what we also touched on in this conversation today is that when you take it back to leadership, in management and throw it up to the top to your leaders and put some of the onus on them, I think that also will make a difference as well. And so I truly believe that this conversation today, I hope that you all were able to, get some great information from this. We really, really missed our Rhonda brought us today. So unfortunate, not having her part of this conversation. But Andy and Matt, you guys are doing amazing work at your centers, and we just want to thank you both for being a part. Lori?
Yes. So before we do exit and all of that, I just have a couple things to bring up. So one question for the panel was any tips for changing the mindset of management that might be stuck on the old legacy feedback methods?
I saw the question. I was trying to think of an answer. I, I don't, perhaps you can find, if there's a way to find an ally or someone that is seeing things the way you see them, um, that's in management, perhaps you can start there. Um, but aside from that, I think that uh, finding ways to bring some feedback that's not anecdotal. If there's any stats or data or something you can do to show that there's a direct connection. I assume because we all are, your agency is probably having a hiring and retention problem. So I think when those are the big ticket items for people that are in management, and so I think if you can find ways to directly correlate the fact um, that is influencing that, perhaps that's a way in, but it's difficult. It's very difficult.
Yeah, and I'll jump in to just further support what Andy's saying. And I think it's the unique perspective, right? Where we have to remain highly objective, oftentimes, and bringing, like she said, some of that the proof that can't really be disputed per se. I think another aspect of it as well, though, is to also frame it as some of what is the return on the investment of considering the change to those. And I think when we talk about simulations and even the word calibration that came up a few times today is maybe even a tip for changing that mindset is getting people into the same space. And I go back to my original EMDQ training days when you talk about calibration to make sure all of your people are evaluating in the same manner is to present the same situation, let people work through it, and then discuss how we're kind of working through to find where are the ways that we can challenge ourselves to maybe move forward? Where are the ways that some of our old principles aren't working in the same manner? And so I think for me, and yes, I understand it may be tough, right? Again, based on how maybe the structure of an organization or your ECC or PSAP might be, is how can we work though, even as all those different levels of leadership to calibrate how we deal with things like feedback. So even a simulated scenario that everyone works through, and then we start to evaluate where are the places that we can learn and grow, even as those who are the coaches, right? And again, it goes back to coaching the coach in that manner.
And I'll just add that, when you think of the old ways, I think having that group of leadership to be a part of every piece of the decision, every piece of the provisioning, so that they can see, where we're coming from and where we're going to, because that is going to have a major effect on how we do things, right? We have so many ways of, oh, well, on paper, this is what we do, this is what we deliver, and that's it. And so when we get our folks to think in a different mindset and just show them and have them be a part, I think that also makes a big difference as well.
And there
Lori?
was one last question. There was one last question asking if there was a program or has anyone developed anything in regards to the supervisor simulations. And all I can tell you is we have some exciting news coming out very soon, so stay tuned to GovWorx.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lori. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you'd like to reach out, we have the contact information that for each person here. But thank you again, and don't forget that coaching the coaches is just very important, and we can't